Rules Committee will come to order, and good afternoon, and welcome back to another fun day at the Rules Committee. Today, the committee will be considering the Senate amendments to H.R. 695, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act of 2018. This critical legislation funds our nation's national defense and provides the resources needed to continue our essential military efforts abroad to protect this great nation and the volunteers who protect this country, to ensure that their families know that their safety is cared for by this nation. A well-equipped, well-trained, effective military for the common defense of our country is in the interest of all Americans, and I believe the world. This bill provides $584 billion in discretionary funding and $75.1 billion for the war effort, which, when added to the $4.7 billion in emergency missile defeat and ship repair funds that have already been enacted into law, it brings to the total funding for the Defense Department to $664 billion, fully consistent with the enacted National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2018. This legislation ensures a 2.4% pay raise for members of the military, something that I think we can agree on, that is necessary and at an urgent time to make sure that our military families know that we care about them, and important for those who not only keep our nation safe, but to protect their families at home also. I hope that we can all agree that the growing threats around the world, especially the acceleration of nuclear and missile tests out of North Korea, that we understand it's imperative that we put politics aside and come together to ensure military has the resources not only to plan but to deliver on their promise to protect America and really to do their job safely. Every day we delay, I believe the readiness of our forces is imperiled. With that, I'm very pleased to welcome the gentlewoman from Fort Worth, Texas, my neighbor, the gentlewoman Kay Granger, as well as the gentleman from Indiana, Pete. We're delighted that you're here. As always, each time you both appear, we both know we're talking to people who have not only dedicated themselves to the effort of our military, but the families that go behind that. And Pete, for so many years you've been here to make sure that you serve as a needed and able friend of the military. And Ms. Granger, I know you do too, and we're delighted that you're here. So thank you for joining us here to discuss this important legislation. Without objection, anything you brought in writing will be in the record. You see we've got our awesome stenographer today who is prepared to take testimony. It would allow her to properly finish out the record exactly as you said it. And we're delighted also to have the gentlewoman, the ranking member of the committee, Mrs. Slaughter. Louise, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. We're going to push that little button there and yield you anytime you'd like to welcome our guests.
Oh, shall I make an opening statement?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Without objection, that'd be great.
I'll do that. I do want to welcome these wonderful people. Kay's a great, wonderful woman who's looking great. I can tell that you're much better. That's good. And Pete Visklowski is one of a kind, and I've always loved working with him. It's because that Indiana way of really laying it out there straight, Pete. I thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, this is the third time I can't help but notice that the Rules Committee has considered this the same defense appropriations bill for 2018. In this fiscal year, we've done it. This will be the third vote we'll take. We first met in July and then September, and now we're back today with 4 legislative days until we face another government shutdown. Do you have any notion that the Senate may take it up this time?
The answer to that is no, ma'am.
We don't.
We don't, but I think we have resolve on this side, and I'm sure the Pete and Kay show today will show how important this is that we do our work here and make sure the Senate sees it.
We have done our work here twice. This is the third time. And
Third time's
given
charm.
the fact that on the CR issue last week, all we ever heard about was a defense bill. And so it's really hard to follow what's happening here in Congress. But we're wasting time on the latest version of a bill unlikely to pass the Senate. Majority decided to lift only the caps for defense spending. It shows a complete disregard for many essential non-defense programs. The majority left a lot undone with the last continuing resolution. Healthcare for millions remains at risk until we reauthorize the community health centers. It's good that we've got CHIP for the children, but they need to have a place to go to utilize that health care. Americans continue to die from the opioid epidemic, claiming 91 lives a day. Funding shortfall for Veterans Choice Program persists, and that's just a few. The bill does make bipartisan investments in key areas, and for that I thank Chairwoman Granger and Ranking Member Visclosky. In particular, the bill continues important programs working to address American manufacturing the security gaps in key technology areas, including photonics, robotics, lightweight metals, and digital manufacturing. And I appreciate your commitment to manufacturing in the United States, and our national security does certainly count on that. What we need most, though, and I think our side has pointed that out many times, what we need most is a bipartisan agreement to raise spending caps for bills and both defense and non-defense, which we are supposed to do. The approach being taken by the majority falls woefully short in providing the agencies such as the Veterans Department, many things that we do that also deal with the military that are on the domestic side. We've got to do better. Let's work together to raise the caps, address the priorities so the nation can finally stop governing from one self-inflicted crisis to the very next. I hate to be cranky on a Monday because it will only get worse, I promise. But in any case, I'm happy to have you two here. You're two of my favorites. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to, if I can, to try and answer your question. Dr. Burgess, we put a 6-year authorization in for CHIP. We've tried to fund the whole government permanently, which would take care of all this, but the gentlewoman brought up a question about community health centers. Would the gentleman, could I yield to him to give us an update about
Absolutely, I'd love to hear.
It'd be a good
You would
update.
know.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. As you recall, a bill that this House voted on the 1st of November, first week in November, did provide 5 years of funding for the children's health insurance, as well as a 2-year funding for community health centers, 2-year for teaching health centers, and there were some other associated public health items that were included in that. That did pass the House. I think it passed with probably 24 Democratic votes. Went over to the Senate, and they refused to take it up. So recognizing the urgency of getting the children's health insurance portion funded, the 6-year bill, since Congressional Budget Office did rescore after the repeal of the individual mandate, and the actual score for a 6-year bill essentially returns $1 billion to the Treasury. It became it became pretty straightforward to include the 6 years of the CHIP authorization. The community health centers were not quite in the same dire fiscal position that some states were with their children's health insurance. There was funding to last until March, and my hope is obviously that whatever time it takes to get this next continuing resolution done, the remainder of those public health bills that were previously included in the House-passed bill in November of 2017 would again be part of whatever is put together for the continuing resolution that comes up, whatever it is, February 5th or 8th, when that bill comes due.
I've got one question, perhaps Louise does. Is there anything at risk, urgently at risk? And I think that answer is yes, because we got to do it so they can plan to do their business. Correct. Is anybody right now in shutdown, or are they funded for some period of time, which makes this next agreement critical on this issue?
If the gentleman will yield further, they are funded until the 1st or the 15th of March. But as you know very well, it becomes very difficult to plan, to hire. The teaching health centers that was funded for a 2-year time period in the bill that we passed in the House in November. Teaching health centers, residents are having to make a commitment to their teaching programs. So although there is not the risk of a center closing, it needs to be funded. It needs to be taken care of, and we do nobody any favors by continuing to drag it out. So my bias would be that I wish we had done it last week when we did the CHIP bill. I wish the Senate had passed what we passed in November, but it is certainly within our ability to get this done and not put anyone else at risk going forward. And
I do have 3 centers in my area that do extraordinarily good work, and they are worried to death. They started with me in the summertime. You remember
Speaking
you and
with
I
you
talked
earlier,
about it
yes.
earlier, trying to make sure we could get some reason on that, because we can't do without it.
Would that be in the next funding bill that we would presumptively do? If we would, when we fund the government, it would be in there?
I would not presume that I can intuit what leadership on both sides will do,
But
but
if
that
we-
would be the logical place to take care of this. Again, we've done the legislative work in subcommittee and full committee. We've marked a bill up in subcommittee and full committee. We presented a bill on the floor of the House. I don't think there is any reason to hold this up longer, other than it's just been difficult to come to agreements on so many things. My hope would be to have the defense bill and the funding for the community health centers up the same day, and let's just get it done.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Yield back.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for that great question. Dr. Burgess, as chairman of the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, we appreciate your not only service to that committee also, but for your ability to express it here. Pete, we're delighted you and Kay are here. Pete, you were not there, but we had a Texas State Society meeting some years ago, and the Honorable Kay Granger was the president of the organization, the head honcho, and she stood up at the end of this long room with, it looks like, almost like those same jewelry on. Is that right?
That's an amazing memory. Except had a lot more junk hanging off it.
It did, and junk, but that was on there too, as I recall.
And I think that was about 15 years.
Probably, well, okay. Kay, I remember that. I've been a fan for a while. We're delighted that you both are here. We've already given you the opportunity for anything you brought in writing will be made in we enter the record without objection. The gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to testify in front of you today in support of the fiscal year 2018 Defense Appropriations Bill. This bill provides $659 billion for defense. It has $28 billion above the president's request and more than $60 billion above last year's level. When combined with the almost $5 billion already enacted into law in December, this bill matches the top-line funding level in the final National Defense Authorization Act that was enacted into law. Our federal dollars all are not the same. We need to prioritize national security after years of neglect and an increasingly dangerous international situation. I think we would all agree that that's where we are. Nor can we continue to hold our troops hostage as leverage for unrelated issues. We're almost 4 months into fiscal year 2018, and our troops still don't have their funding. It's time that the Congress fulfills its responsibility to fund our troops at the levels needed. It's time to lift the budget caps and enact a full-year Defense Appropriation Act so that our military can begin to rebuild. This bill does that by lifting the budget caps on defense and fully funding the department at the top line already approved by the Congress in the Defense Authorization Act. It takes care of our troops by providing additional manpower and fully funding a 2.4% pay increase. It provides additional funding for key readiness programs and robustly funds maintenance of equipment and facilities. The bill includes specific investments in several areas, such as air superiority, where there's a $4.3 billion above the request, shipbuilding, a $1.6 billion above the request, research and development, which is $10 billion above 2017, and defense health, an additional $644 million for medical research. It also makes the ground forces fully equipped. The bill also provides additional resources in a National Defense Restoration Fund in the amount of $28.6 billion to allow Secretary Mattis to begin investing in the new defense strategy now instead of waiting until next year. This bill gives our military leaders the sufficient, sustainable, and stable funding they've told us over and over again that they need. The House has done its job more than once, as you mentioned, to fund our troops at the levels they need, only to have the Senate fail to act. Congress must step up and fulfill its most fundamental constitutional responsibility, which is to ensure our troops have what they need to defend our nation. I thank the Chairman and Rules Committee members for giving me the opportunity to testify today and would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Chairwoman Granger, thank you very much. We're delighted that you're here, and thank you very much. Mr. Viskovsky, thank you for joining us. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Slaughter, and all the members of the committee appreciate being here today. In her remarks, Chairwoman Granger ably described the bill and our situation. As this is the third time I have had the privilege to appear before your committee concerning the legislation at hand, I have little more to say. Despite the best efforts of Chairman Frelinghuysen, Ranking Member Lowy, Chairwoman Granger, the other members of the Appropriations Committee, we are now 121 days into the fiscal year, and I do not believe a realistic path towards enactment of all 12 appropriation bills for fiscal year 2018 has emerged. I would conclude my comments.
Sir, thank you very much. I'd like to have both of you, if you would choose, Chairwoman Granger, the pay raise of 2.4% for the military. My son serves at Pearl Harbor. He is brand new. He's 20 years old and really proud of what he does. United States Navy. 2.4% of these young people who are on the margin is really important. And there were some years, one or two, where we could not give pay raises. And then we did give pay raises and have done this. Are you aware of maybe the length of time and how this is happening? Are we staying up with basic allotments the way we should, or is this just what we could yield at this time? Ms. Granger?
We're doing our very best on that. It's one of those things, everybody's on every committee in appropriations, you have to say, here's what we've gotten, and we went to, starting with General Mattis, and said, what are your priorities? What do you need, very specifically? How many people, what the equipment, the planes, the ships, and then went back and said, this is the priority, yes. We'd love to pay them more. Right now, they also want equipment that works. And our Air Force, more than half the planes are grounded, not enough maintenance done on them. So we looked at all of those out there and said to those people like your son that are serving, they deserve to be paid. They also deserve to be trained and to have the equipment they need.
And I assume that means as an aircraft carrier, an F-18, which we know we need to look at. Great workhorses,
Yeah.
but stress on them over the years. Pete, I want to thank you for the time that you and the chairwoman spend also with our troops in the field, on ships. Can you give us any update about what you're thinking about this 2.4% increase, about how vitally important that is?
It's vitally important, but Mr. Chairman, I would answer your question in a different fashion.
Yes, sir.
It is vitally important that Congress gets its work done after the passage of 121 days. I can remember several years ago having lunch with sailors from the state of Indiana on the Truman that was docked in Norfolk. It was during a period of time very similar to the last several weeks. And as I describe it, Mr. Big Mouth here asked the sailors how they're doing. And one of them didn't hold back and said, "Sir, I just spent money to send my family back to Indiana because I was to be underway and at sea, but now they are in Indiana at my expense. I am here sitting in a dock in Norfolk." And there were somewhere between 4,000 or 5,000 sailors on that ship, and I bet every one of them had a similar thought and experience. And I think too often we think in macroeconomic terms that we're violating the Budget Control Act by $35 billion, so we have to have language in this bill for sequestration. What about the lives of all of those people and how they plan? So I appreciate your sentiments, and certainly the chairwoman makes those visits, and that's why we do, is what is the individual impact, and in this case, of not acting?
I think your point's well made. The whole family's on orders.
Yeah, right.
Chairwoman Granger, could you describe to us what, if anything, you do related to sequestration or your views on that issue?
Well, my view is it's bad, but we have it, and so we abide by it in every way that we did, and looked at all the funding across the board, and we tried to meet, as I said, the priority needs, asking the military, and the way I put it from General Mattis all down, I said, you tell us what you need, what's the most important thing. Our job is to find the resources to fund it. Our job is not to decide how the military should be run or this equipment or that. That's you to do, but that was very important. I would say Mr. Vislowski was very helpful in one situation when he said, I just have some problems there, and I said, why don't you go work on, see if you can bring a solution. He brought the solution, and it was added to this bill and was very helpful. It's been a very bipartisan effort.
Well, I appreciate both of you working together for the success of people who volunteer and sacrifice for our country. Mr. Woodall, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I supported this bill when it was brought in July as a national security package. I supported it again when it was brought in September as a part of an entire funding cycle bill. I will support it again this week. I encourage folks back home who think that there's nothing but divisions and discord in Washington, D.C. to come and watch, particularly our appropriations panels when they come, and they would be inspired by the way they see folks work through their differences. Thinking about individual families, Mr. Vislowski, it does make a difference. You have a choice in cola products, and you have picked Atlanta-based Coca-Cola to drink today. And I say to you that there are hospitals, there are children's shelters, there are educational institutions across the state that benefit from the Coca-Cola company. I would be remiss, though I supported the Budget Control Act when it passed. And the thought was that nobody believed these were the appropriate funding levels for national security. Of course they were not the right funding levels, but because we all, to a man and a woman, care about national security, we would then get about the rest of our business of making sure that Medicare was funded and stable for a generation to come, making sure Social Security was funded and stable for a generation to come. I wish that we did not also have to add to what didn't get done over more than 120 days. What hasn't gotten done for more than 3 years now is us coming together and dealing with those very serious issues. And each and every one of us have constituents back home who worry that my health is not as good as it used to be. I'm in my 50s now, they say, and Rob, will Social Security still be there for me? Rob, will Medicare still be there for me? It's a double pox on our house that we have both put the young men and women that you serve so ably in the armed forces at risk, and we have done little to nothing to solve those larger issues that we came together to support the Budget Control Act originally for. So thank you for bringing this for a third time. I hope you're not back for a fourth time, but I kid you not when I encourage folks to tune into the Rules Committee on the internet, not for our presentations, but for yours, and I'm grateful to you for it. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Slaughter.
When I first came to Congress some time ago, the military budget, I think, was about 350 billion. Now, this bill is 790 billion, is that correct? The total?
Ma'am, we are at $584 billion in base funding.
Right.
And then we have the overseas contingency operation fund.
That's 70 billion.
75, and so if I'm doing my math right, we are at 655.
All right. But they still don't have enough money to maintain the airplanes, is that right, Chairman Granger?
That's what happened with the Air Force, and the maintenance has really become a problem.
Yeah.
So we can fund the equipment, but if we don't fund the cost, the maintenance,
Absolutely.
then they sit on the runways and deteriorate.
Ms. Slaughter, one of the problems the department faces, and again, I would expand my answer to include every agency of this government.
Right.
But the Department of Defense, on average, signs 1,000 contracts a
A
day.
day, I'm not surprised.
They are limited in many of these instances because of the continuing resolutions and the restraints. So whether it be
I don't see how
maintenance,
anybody
and
can
it
handle
just
what we've been
creates
doing here.
havoc as far as their ability to plan and to proceed with, in this case, necessary.
And that itself costs money.
And we are wasting more money than we are saving in this process because of that.
All right. Well, I certainly agree with you, Chairwoman, that micromanaging over there is not a job we can do or should even consider doing. And I agree with you. This is outrageous that we've been trying for, since September to get this passed. But I continue to say that I do wish that we could have done the same with domestic and lifted caps on those as well. I think we're not going to have much left with that 1.5 trillion that's already been borrowed. I don't see how we're going to do an infrastructure bill at all. And I know that's water projects too are very important to you, but let's hope. But thank you anyway, I appreciate that.
Gentleman yields back her time. Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, a member of the Appropriations Committee, the gentleman,
Well,
Chairman
and I'm
Cole.
proud to say a member of Chairman Granger's subcommittee, and my good friend, Mr. Plaskowski, is the ranking member, and I don't have a lot of questions because I sat through most of the hearings and watched you make decisions, but I do want to say for this committee, and it knows this, but I just want to congratulate you both. I think that the way that committee works together in a bipartisan fashion, I wish other people could see it. Our friends on the Armed Services Committee do much the same thing on their committee, but we don't have very many partisan votes, and we come and reason together and find common conclusions in the best interest of the country. I don't know anybody that's been a fiercer opponent than the two of you of sequester and caps that were ill-advised and artificial, particularly in this particular area. And you guys have all, and the whole committee has fought the good fight on this for a while. I'm hopeful that we're going to come to a larger agreement this year, and I'm told we're close. There's obviously lots of complicating issues out there, and but at the end of the day, you can only do what you can do until the powers above you, the administration and the minority leaders and the speaker and the majority leader, come to a common agreement. And we've got a top line number, and I think then, particularly on your committee, where we have so much bipartisanship, a little bit more fire and flare sometimes on Labor H than there is on defense. But I think, you guys will come to a decision. So I want to thank you. Thank you for coming up here. And I know sometimes you wonder why you have to do this over and over, but I think it's really good for the Congress to see this, to get educated. Because if you're not on those committees, it is a lot of money. There's no question about that. But you don't know how dire the situation is, how many cuts have been absorbed, and that's why our friends on the Armed Services Committee speak of this, just like the Defense on Defense approach, with such urgency and such importance as to this, we get a deal and allow you to do your work and marry up the money with the excellent work that the authorizers did when they actually, and I know they worked with both of you very closely in that whole discussion. It's actually a very good cross, committee work between the Defense Subcommittee and the House Armed Services Committee has been for many, many years, been very bipartisan. So I look forward to voting for it enthusiastically. I hope you don't have to come again, but I know you both well enough to know that if you do, you will be here.
That's right.
And you will keep me here until finally you get yes for an answer from both this body, the Senate, and the administration, and I hope you do. So that I yield back.
Chairman Cole, thank you very much. The gentleman from Worcester, Massachusetts.
Almost pronounced it right, but that's okay.
Well, try it again.
But I want to thank you for being here. For the life of me, I don't know why we can't come to agreement on the spending caps. I mean, that solves everybody's problem. And we know that that's basically what has to happen before any of this stuff moves forward. And I know we're doing this because there was a promise made to the Freedom Caucus to bring this bill up. We're going to do it. We'll go through this again. You know, I think everybody here believes that the national security of our country is incredibly important and it needs to be a priority. But just so people are clear, national security issues fall not just under the Department of Defense. We have Homeland Security that protects us from terrorism. There's lots of anti-terrorism and national security programs within our Justice Department. All those things are incredibly important. We all need to act on everything. And I would also argue that to suggest that veterans' health is somehow not important is offensive to the veterans who have served our country with great distinction, or to suggest that programs that help feed people are not important, I think is also offensive. But be that as it may, we have 4 legislative days to go before we have another showdown. And I'm encouraged by the words of my colleague, Mr. Cole, that somehow that negotiations are going on and they're moving forward. I hope so. And then we could all just get this done and fund the government for the rest of the year, which we should have done months ago. You know, and I think, you know, the way we get this done is to just do our job. And I hope that that happens, and I hope it happens soon, because, you know, I mean, this General Mattis said that one of the worst things for our military is these continuing resolutions. We've done 4 already. We're probably going to, I hope we're not doing a 5th, but we may be approaching a 5th. At some point, people need to just lock themselves in a room and agree on these, on overall spending caps, and just move on. I know it's hard for Republicans to do that, because you got to deal with your Freedom Caucus, but at some point, you know, you have to do it, and I hope that happens soon. So I thank you for your work, and I hope you know, we get to a year-long agreement, and so we're not doing more continued resolutions. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his.
Just say one
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and I completely agree with what you said, and these delays are really tragic. But it's not just, we don't save money, we lose money.
I agree.
The other thing that's so important is those generals, General Mattis, the secretary, he loses his plan, his time to plan. So he has a plan, but then when it takes you're 4 months into the year before you pass the bill, then that plan kind of goes by the wayside. And they say that is as costly as anything, is that delay.
You're absolutely right, and that is why we ought to fund the government for a year at a time. And by the way, we don't just lose money on continuing resolutions with regard to the military, we lose it everywhere else. I mean, a state trying to do a transportation project, trying to figure out whether they have the money to do it, they put it off, because they don't know whether we're going to fund the government from month to month to month. And if we do, what level it will be at. But everything, I mean, this dysfunction and this incompetence, quite frankly, is costing the taxpayers a lot of money. And it has to stop. And so let's hope that the news that Mr. Cole just reported to us is real, and people are actually getting along and trying to work on numbers, and they can bring something to the floor that will get bipartisan support, and we can move on, and that's the end of this. So, but I thank you for your work, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have much to add beyond the comments I made originally. Mr. Viscosi, just like you, I look forward to voting for this again. I'll vote for it as many times as we have to, but I really hope this is the last go-round with this. I do also want to point out that the House did, thanks to your committee, the House did deliver every appropriations bill before the end of the fiscal year. It is time to get those bills done, and we've got another fiscal year coming up, and it's just time to get it done. So thank you both for being here.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Judge Hastings, the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the chair lady and my good friend, the ranking member, for their testimony, their insightfulness, and their bipartisan approaches to these problems. I don't have questions for them, but I do wish to make an observation. And it is strange and mystifying that with the Republican majority in control, that somehow or another, the times previous that this matter has gone to the Senate, allows that there must not be very much communication with the Senate leadership and the House leadership on something this critical and important. It would seem to me that there would be an understanding when we pass a measure that's as important as this one, or that the Senate would take it up. And yet, Senator Cochran hasn't taken this up. He hadn't taken up the hurricane and disaster relief measures, and I find that rather mystifying. I do want to segue off of Mr. McGovern's remarks and add what General Mattis actually said. He spoke to the dysfunction in Washington and the congressionally mandated spending caps and lawmakers' inability to pass a budget, and indicated that it was eroding, and I believe all of us understand and agree, the military's ability to retool and prepare for future threats. Chair Lady Granger just pointed to the lack of planning and the loss of money when that occurs. And yet there are significant positions, including the comptroller at the Defense Department, that are not filled. And I find that mystifying, not only there, but at state, which has a critical role to play in the security of this country as well. But what the general is quoted as having said is the following: as hard as the last 16 years have been, no enemy in the field has done more harm to the readiness of the United States military than the combined impact of the Budget Control Act, defense spending cuts, and operating in 9 of the last 10 years under continuing resolutions. He faced some resistance, it appears, from the White House, which raises a concern that many of us talk about all the time. We did these tax cuts, and no less an authority than our former colleague, Mr. Mulvaney, indicated that he feared, or worried was his word, that there would be a deficit explosion with the increase in military combined with tax cuts. Now, I can't make it all make sense, but I do wish to offer up something positive that happened last week. We recognize that we've not acted to improve the Department of Veterans Affairs. But last Friday, in the congressional district that I'm privileged to serve, my Republican colleague Brian Mast, Lois Frankel, our colleague, and Ted Deutsch and I opened the first shared space agreement in the country with the VA Medical Center in the district. The outline for that is that each one of us will take a day and when we can, we will visit, but we will have staffers that will go there with regularity and provide, hopefully, better services to our constituents. But while there, I had a side meeting with the leadership team at that VA hospital, and they have exacting concerns that they cannot fill vital positions in the hospital, and that the funding shortfall for the Veterans Choice Program is putting care at risk. And these are people, it's a brand-new team there at that VA hospital, that Republicans and Democrats had an awful lot to do with its development. Former colleagues, a few of you would know as far back as Rogers, Micah, my good friend Tom Lewis, and Harry Johnston. All of them laid the groundwork for the development of this VA Medical Center, which is incredibly endowed with individuals that are sincere. But to leave them in the lurch is not a good thing. And I would offer to you all who have VA hospitals in your constituency or in your congressional districts that you consider doing what we did. It took us a year of combined effort to be able to open an office at the VA, but I think it's a template that can be looked at for others. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Judge. I kind of do what you do. I go to my VA. There's a group in Dallas called Whiskers for Warriors. These are men with these long beards. They look like ZZ Top. They walk in every month to the VA hospital in Dallas. They offer people to mow their grass back home, to go by and talk to their neighbors, to visit and tell them that how they're doing. They offer them help, but it's really just neighbor to neighbor. And I've done that 2 or 3 times, and I don't know the best way to help, but these the men and women who served our country's young people now are older, long of tooth, really do need better services, and I appreciate your help there with the VA hospital. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia, looks like, oops, yeah, gentleman from Georgia. Mike, did you talk or did I have you talk earlier? You talked, yeah. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Colorado. Gentleman does not seek time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of you for being here today. There are 3 reasons to vote for this bill. First, we've heard from the Secretary of the Navy that the continuing resolutions we've passed over the last 5 or 6 years have cost the Navy $4 billion. And it's his words, it's literally like flushing $4 billion down the toilet. I can imagine if we added Air Force and Army to the Navy and Marine Corps, we'd see a much bigger number than that. The second reason is, and you two know this better than probably anybody in this room, the threat matrix facing the United States has never been this complex or this deep since the end of World War II. Russia is reinvesting all across its defense platforms. China dramatically investing across its defense platforms and obviously pushing itself out into the South China Sea in ways we have never seen. Russia, of course, has come back in ways we used to see during the Cold War, and now they're coming back in as if the Cold War never ended. Iran, which was freed by this agreement that President Obama reached with them, Iran is reinvesting and investing in all sorts of defense technology. Obviously, we see what's happening in North Korea with their use of missiles and trying to perfect their nuclear technology. And that doesn't address the myriad of terrorist groups that go by various names across the Middle East, North Africa, Philippines, and really all over the world. And so while all of that is occurring, we're running our military by using continuing resolutions, which is a dereliction of duty on our part. But the reason that has really touched me more than anything else is one hearing that we had, and I think Ms. Cheney was there in the House Armed Services Committee. We had the Vice Chief of Naval Operations come and report to us about how the readiness problem is affecting direct activities of the Navy, and we had one of the mothers of one of the dead sailors from one of those two destroyer incidents there. And there is no question, zero question, that our use of continuing resolutions are not only contributing to that readiness issue, it's contributing to the death of U.S. servicemen and women, which is totally, totally unacceptable. I've heard a lot of people talk about that this is immoral and that's immoral, about decisions being made here. When we do things that result in the death of our servicemen and women, that's immoral. I mean, I don't think any of us disagree with that. So the three reasons for us to vote for it: I think this bill will pass the House. It's passed the House twice before. The problem is it's going to go over there to the other side of the Capitol. And unfortunately, on the other side of the Capitol, you got to have 60 votes to pass appropriations bills. Mr. Cole and I have had conversations about the ill wisdom of that, about the need for for the Senate to go to majority vote, but we don't get to vote on the Senate rules. So in order for them to pass a funding bill over there, it takes Democrats and Republicans to agree, and they don't have an agreement over there between them. Now, I've heard that part of the problem there is that we've got to get an agreement on the domestic discretionary side. And if that's so, that's so. I've never seen a funding bill pass around here without us having to reach such agreements. Well, let's get an agreement. We should have gotten this agreement months ago. I'm told that there was a pretty good set of talks going on among leadership about this two spending caps, and then they abruptly came to an end sometime last fall over this whole immigration thing. I want to get to an immigration agreement as bad as anybody in here, but I don't know why that has to be tied to our moral duty to fund the military at an appropriate level. So I'm going to vote for this for a third time. I'm going to go see my senators, one of whom is now a Democrat, by the way, and get them to be supportive of this. I think they will be. I'm going to ask Senator McCollum to bring it up for a vote, and we'll see if we can get 60 votes for it. If we can't, then I think that's a message to the people of America about where the Senate is, not where the House is. So I appreciate the hard work you've done. I've been before you several times. Y'all are very gracious to every member of the House that comes before your subcommittee. And I look forward to voting for this bill, and as you probably know, being right back in front of your subcommittee probably another couple of months as y'all do your great work. So thank you for what you do. I'm looking forward to supporting the bill, and I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for what you said. I will add that one of the other costs in this that hurts our men and women who serve is the situation where the training, when there's not the money to train fully, and that's showing up in some situations that we're finding. What's the reason for that?
And I don't want to pile on, Mr. Chairman, but one, I'm in absolute agreement with the chairwoman. And I would point out, and I think everyone on this committee understands, the administration is going to present to us within a week 19's budget, and I would ask you, what are they basing those numbers off of? And the chairwoman and I met with an official from the department about a week ago, and this gentleman, as you can imagine, said, we're working on 20. Because you have $659 billion for defense and 17 intelligence agencies that are also wondering what's going to happen. So I would appreciate your comments.
If I may reclaim my time just briefly. Yeah, I mean, we're right into 19, and you're right, they're planning on 20, because that's the way you have to do defense. You got to think long-term. It takes a long time to build a ship, jets, these new weapon systems that have to bring online. If we're going to get the readiness level we need to, they've got to have predictability for that. So I strongly agree with what both of you said, and I sort of feel like I'm repeating myself, because I said it at least twice before in this room with y'all. But, you know, at some point, we've got to quit playing games and get down and get the most important thing that we're here in Congress to do, and that is defend the United States of America. And I finally yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Sunnyside, Washington.
I thank Chairman Sessions for recognizing me, and also thanking you, Ms. Granger, Chairman Granger, and Mr. Visklosky for bringing to us this bill, and for your work on rebuilding our military, for helping us to fulfill one of our largest obligations as a federal government, to support our military, to defend our nation, for the training, for the equipment, for the preparedness, for the pay, all of those things that go into this. It's something we take very seriously. We've got two members of the House Armed Services Committee right here on this panel, so we we hear often about that obligation, and so I appreciate your work on helping us accomplish that. So I'm a relatively new member of Congress, and so I can attribute this to that, but I also a very new member of the Appropriations Committee. A pleasure and honor to sit on that panel with you. I just had a question. Mr. Wisłowski mentioned and reminded us that we are 121 days into the fiscal year. And so my question has to do with the numbers we're looking at that you presented this afternoon. Does that reflect any kind of proportionality here? Are we looking at a full fiscal year funding level, or are we reflecting that we are already 4 months in?
No,
Is
we're
that
looking in full
a
fiscal
full,
year.
okay. So how is that accounted for? How do we deal with that? Or help me understand.
Well, some of it drops off as an expense because it's too late
So we're not going to spend it anyway.
contract. So that happens
Okay.
when you have a delay like that. So you plan, but if you were building a house and said, well, we put a bid on this, but we can't get to it, well, then you don't spend that.
You don't
So there's
spend
all
that money. Okay.
sorts of things, and those secretaries have to figure that out. So we just keep adding to the difficulty of having things that we need to provide for our military, finding the resources, the money for it, and then we don't give them the time or pay attention to their planning because we can't do
Oh,
that
I
work.
I can imagine
That's
trying to
where-
manage under that situation. Yeah. So we're setting levels, spending levels that will be used to build on for future years as well. Okay.
And despite people's best efforts, tomorrow we're 33% of the way through the year.
Yeah, right.
And you're asking people with the best of intentions, expertise, intelligence, to take 12 months of spending
Cram it
and compress them into 8 months and do it efficiently and effectively. It just every day increases that degree of difficulty. It's a great question.
We're setting them up to fail, really, because that's very, very difficult to do that.
I hate to pile on something like this, but it's really important that everyone knows this. Those of us who serve on the committees, you know, we see it and we look at the numbers and that, but everyone pays so much attention to their committee. So if you're on agriculture, I can't converse with someone who chairs agriculture.
It's a different language.
Yeah, right. But it is the most important thing we do is keeping our nation safe and secure. So we're also looking at, for instance, the weapons we use. We want to be on the outer limit. We want to have the best, the newest. We don't want to be behind in what we're buying. But see, we get behind in everything, and then how do we make sure that our equipment, our weapons are the best in the world, which is what our goal has always been and where we always
Right.
have been.
Right, good, thank you.
And I just want to be clear for the record, this is not in addition to what has been spent for the 4 years. The monies under the CRs are a subset of that total of
For the 4 months, you
659 billion. Yes, except now, again, you still have this misallocation. And I would want to bring up our staffs for a second. One of the things that will happen, and it's every agency in the government, is one of the ways that the department will try to compensate and intelligently spend this money is what we call a reprogramming process, where because of the mismatches, we will ask permission of the chairwoman of our subcommittee in the Senate, can we move some monies from A to B because we can't effectively spend, the need is incredible amount of time, one for the department, and an additional imposition on our staff as they're trying to do 19. Which again, they're happy to do it, but it's just another complication to the system.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think I understand the direction this takes us and the position it puts our military in, detracts from their ability to actually do their jobs. And I find myself in agreement with many of the comments that were made today. I don't like continuing resolutions. I think we need to come to a solution or an agreement on the budget caps. Yeah, I think that's the responsible thing to do, and we have a deadline in place, and hopefully we're going to get that work done. But again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate both of you coming before us and enlightening us again as to our responsibility and the gravity of the decisions we make here as it comes in relationship to the defense of our nation and our military's ability to carry out their mission. So With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Windsor, Colorado, Mr. Buck. Gentleman does not seek time. Thank you very much. The gentlewoman, Mrs. Cheney, has been here and evidently walked out a second. Don't know whether she intended. Well, it has something to do with University of Wyoming having the #1 draft pick in football, I know, because I talked to her about that today. In fact, thank you very much. Okay, is there any other member that would seek time? I want to thank both of you. The expressions of support from this committee about your important service, not only to duty to the country, but actually to perform these on behalf of this body. Wise choices, wise decisions, and to provide us the feedback is really appreciated. I want to thank both of you for taking time to be with us today, remembering that both of our assistant stenographers are here. If you'll please leave whatever you brought in writing for their completion of the record, I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. We have an opportunity to recognize gentleman Brandon Berry from Southwestern University, a sophomore from Houston. Gentleman Brandon, welcome. That's my alma mater. Also to welcome two of my staff members, Travis S. Reynolds and Matt Garcia, our Texas Operations Director. So I want to thank them for being here today. I'd like to see if any other member would like to give testimony on any amendments that they may have, and the gentleman from Colorado would be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I submitted an amendment. It's very simple. It simply provides a 1% cut in the Department of Defense appropriations, and my amendment would go a small way towards protecting the fiscal security of our nation as well as meeting the needs of our national security. This base budget exceeds the Budget Control Act by $35 billion. That does not include the $10 billion of base spending that has been placed in contingency account, which seems like an accounting trick because base spending is not a contingency. This is an accounting gimmick to work around the budget caps. My amendment would give the President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of Energy the authority to reduce the overall amount of money authorized by 1%, excluding personnel accounts and health accounts. And I want to remind everyone that even with this 1% reduction, we're still well above the original defense caps from the Budget Control Act. This would only cut about $6.5 billion from the authorization. And, of course, the real discussion is about the budget levels on both sides, defense and non-defense of the budget. I really think that if passing another Republican spending bill is not the best thing to do when we're facing record deficits that this bill would only add to. So I hope that we can show some signs of fiscal responsibility. I hope my colleagues allow this very simple amendment that would leave intact the authorization well above the Budget Control Level Act, but make sure that we show that we care for our fiscal security as well as our national security. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Would the gentleman make himself available for questions?
Yes.
Is there any member of the committee that would seek to offer questions to, in this case, our witness, the gentleman with an amendment, Mr. Polis? Seeing none, thank you very much. I would, without objection, add to the record the Statement of Administrative Policy, House Amendment to H.R. 695, Department of Defense Appropriations Act 2018. And reading down in the SAP, if H.R. 695 were presented to the President in its current form, his advisors would recommend that he sign the bill into law. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that. I don't know whether Mr. Polis, you get a vote on your amendment or not? No. Oh, okay, well, you're okay. But a question, and you just read that line, but below that line, it says, constitutional concerns. Certain provisions in the bill raise constitutional concerns. Do you know what those constitutional concerns are?
I don't.
It just seems kind
And
of
I
strange
did
the
see
president
that.
would want to sign a bill that he has constitutional concerns with, but it's Donald Trump, so I guess it's, yeah. Anyway, if anyone knows what the constitutional concerns are.
That's a good point, and I'm sorry, I wish I should have brought this up with both the members when they were here. of the
We'll figure it out.
Appropriations Committee.
Thank you.
Does any other member offer any information related to that? Seeing none, I tell you what I will do, I will make sure that as we discuss the rule on the floor, I'll be prepared to, that we talk about that. And I thank the gentleman for his question. Okay, is there any other member that would seek time or to have an amendment placed before the committee? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 695, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of the Senate amendments to H.R. 695, Child Protection Improvement Act of 2017. Rule makes an order a single motion offered by the chair of the Committee on Appropriations or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment to the title and concur in the Senate amendment to the text, and with an amendment consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-56. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion and provides that it shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule provides that the Senate amendments and the motion shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule provides 1 hour of debate on the motion equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations.
Thank you very much. You've heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman. I'll yield myself a short time to explain this motion. Makes an order a motion to concur in the Senate amendment with the House amendment. Obviously, this is to fund the government. 1 hour debate provided to the chairman and ranking member of the Committee on Appropriations. Pretty simple opportunity to add in H.R. 695. Thank you very much. Is there further amendment or discussion? Gentlewoman. What I tried to do is to say that this is to add to the Senate amendment, which will put this, we're trying to get them to simply fund DOD appropriations. So they had made an amendment to it, and we are going to do that. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for my amendment to Senate amendments to H.R. 695, number 2, which would reduce the total amount by 1%, excluding military personnel in the Defense Health Program account.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion, the amendment. Is there a discussion to that? Okay, we'll now vote on the opposed amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it.
Roll call,
Noes have it.
please.
Gentleman asks for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Slaughter? No. Ms. Slaughter? Ms. Slaughter? Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Didn't he look awesome?
The likeness is really remarkable.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Yes, so for the committee, before we move further, the gentleman, Mr. Dreyer, last weekend, was in Washington, and Joe Meany, who used to be our communications director, yeah, Joe's very nice, one of her kids drew a picture of the former chairman of the Rules Committee and said, she said, David, your picture is not hung up there, so we've now added this. And so there's the Honorable David Dreyer. And, as best I can tell you, Louise, you look great. Jerry looks great. Joe looks great. And So here we go. So David's right there.
This fella really looks good.
Yeah.
That's how to dress.
And dress for success, right?
And a little spit for
Yeah. So, in fact, that is David Dreyer, and he's doing well up there. Okay. Further amendment or discussion before we move to the motion? Seeing none, those in favor of the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. Ayes have it, ayes have it. And a gentlewoman asked for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck? Aye. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Slaughter? Ms. Slaughter? No. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentlewoman from the great state of Wyoming, Mrs. Cheney, will be handling this.
And the gentleman from the great state of Massachusetts.
And the gentleman, Mr. McGovern, will be handling this for the minority. Judge Hastings, now's about the time you know the answer. You want to share it? Well, the answer is that we have no additional meetings scheduled this week. As we know, this week Republicans go on their retreat at the end of the week, and I believe next week your team does that.
You did notice that in the middle of our retreat is the end of the CR.
I did notice that the Senate wanted it that
We
way.
are somewhat perplexed.
Did you talk to Senator Schumer about that?
Haven't talked to Chuck.
Okay.
Chuck probably that.
Okay. All right, we've now finished our work for the week, and I appreciate everybody's attention to the matter. Thank you very much.